Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, Patrick T and LICSW. And this video, part 1 and part 2, is going to be all about the genogram. So what is a genogram? Some of you have heard about it, and essentially what it is a family tree. It has many different uses in different settings. If you're in sort of alcohol and drug addiction treatment, they might have you put together a genogram spelling out sort of addictions in the family. If even in the medical world, they might use a genogram to spell out the hereditary nature of the family in terms of cancer. But the way that we're going to use this video is we're going to do a family tree about the dysfunction and toxicity in the family. And most importantly, we're going to be telling our story through putting together a genogram. It's not just putting out everyone's story. It's going to be to help you figure out where does a lot of your problems and anxiety, depression, relationship problems, where might that come from? When I am starting with a client, is I usually try to encourage them to put together a genogram with me, or where most of it happens is in the group work that I do. When I start a group, the first exercise is every group member gets a session dedicated to them, and as a group, as our first agenda item is everyone does a genogram and presents that to the group itself. It is a huge piece of work that part 1 is putting the thing together, and part 2 is presenting it into a safe, healthy environment, and we get feedback on what it might have been like to be a child growing up in that toxicity. So that's the way that I'm doing it. So for you guys, the viewers, is what I suggest. If you want to go down this road and put together a genogram, it's going to be helpful to you. But I think it's going to be more helpful to you if you're able to, either with a therapist or a safe person, present it to them or in some way that is very much safe. And by safe, I mean that they are very much understanding of the dysfunctional family system. You don't want to be doing this with a friend that's kind of like, yeah, I get it, it's hard, but she's your mom, what are you going to do? So I would really encourage you, hands down, that you have to be very selective in who you choose to share this thing with to get feedback for. Therapists are great. Therapists who sort of get the family system stuff are great. You don't want to be presenting this to a therapist who is like maybe not, that's not in their mindset, or that's like not what their gig is. Hopefully that makes sense. I've broken up the video into 2 parts. The first part is going over 3 handouts that is going to be available on my website. The first handout is how to structure your family system. Things like sort of how the people are structured, what the relationships mean in terms of marriage, blended families, that kind of a thing. The second handout is going to be about how do you describe the people, how do you describe the issues, how do you describe the relationships, and that is like a key, a genogram dysfunctional family, the key. Those are essentially the directions. The third handout is a hypothetical genogram that I put together and will be presenting fully in the part 2 of this video. So chop, chop, chop. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So let's get into it and you'll see what I mean. And if at any point in the video, there's a lot of these concepts are hard, try to think about this video like you're learning a class about the dysfunctional family system. If you get triggered or something really hits you hard because it really replicates your own family system, just take a pause, come back to it. Some good news about that stuff is the toxic family system, and I try to say this in every one of my videos, is it's very predictable, and it's very patternized, and it's actually way more common in society than we think. So I think we need to lessen the stigma of coming from family dysfunction, because you'd be surprised how much of it is prevalent in our society. So let's get into it and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so this is the first of 3 handouts. This is the structure of a family tree to do the genogram. What we have here is 3 or 4 nuclear families. We have the Joneses, we have the Smiths, so we could look at it as this is dad's side of the family, and this is the mother's side of the family. This is the nuclear family of the client who is in bold putting this system together. So if, you know, when you're doing this, put yourself in a little bit of bold, or really let the viewer know that this is you and your story. As a side note, there's an additional nuclear family that I'm explaining, blended family dynamics, or how to map that out. Okay, so some structural stuff. A square is a male. A circle is a female. So these two people got together. These bars that come down signify a partnership or a marriage where there's biological children. These two people got together, the Joneses. They had 2 boys. I try to have clients do the oldest to the youngest from left to right, just for the sake of just looking at it for it to be kind of clean. But that doesn't. These are details that you don't have to remember everything. And then let's jump over to this family system. This male got together with this female. They had 3 children. They have a partnership or marriage. And these 3 bars that come down signify their biological children. This just happens to be, this is the hypothetical genogram that I put together, is this sort of looks clean because the youngest boy over here married the oldest girl. And what I mean by that is, let's say that this gentleman married this woman and not that woman. So when you put your genogram together, sometimes that might take out the oldest to youngest order because this bar would have to stretch out over here. So, and that's the case where, you would just sort of flip these 2 people. So there's that. Let's see. These 2 people got together. This is the client's family, the person putting together the genogram. They had 3 children. The oldest, a woman, the middle child, a boy, the youngest, a woman. The youngest is married to this man. She has 2 biological daughters with him, but he has 2 sons from a prior marriage. This line signifies a divorce or cutoff. So for those of you that come from blended families or even single parent families, some of this is tricky to figure out. In the case that you have one parent, you would still put the biological person over there with a question mark. You don't have a relationship with this person. And you can do this in any way that is the best way that you see fit, that will make sense to you and the person that you're presenting this to if you choose to do that. There was another thought I had in there is, with the blended family stuff, is you may have to get creative. That, let's just say a parent is married several times, is you may have to get creative about that. Incidentally, notice that I don't have cousins on this. This is 3 or 4 generations. We have the grandparents in this top generation. We have our parents and their siblings in this second generation. And then we have our story, our siblings down here. And there's really 4 generations of this other family system down here, which isn't really sort of that important. Putting this thing together is you are telling your family story. And coming back to cousins, let's just say the Joneses, I know this sounds ridiculous, but let's just say that these 2 people had 12 children. You don't necessarily have to put the cousins and all their spouses and the aunts and uncle spouses together. That's unnecessary and too much, unless those people play a significant role in your childhood from the ages of 0 to 20. So that is the structure of putting this thing together. This is the hypothetical genogram, and this will mirror the hypothetical genogram that you'll see in later slides. Okay, so this is the second handout of the instructions on how to put your genogram together. And this, you could think about this as a key system for the Genogram Dysfunctions Key examples. And how you put together a genogram is by using text in this column over here to describe the people, to describe the adults, describe siblings, to describe everybody. We're using words either inside the circle or square or outside of it. We're also using in this column right here symbols that describe emotional qualities, characteristic qualities of the person. We are using colors to describe dynamics and also describe mental health issues. And in this last column over here is we are using these lines, these symbolic relational lines about how people relate to each other. So I'll go through all of those. And to start off, to say, these are just my examples and my suggestions. You can do this in any way, shape, or form. I have had clients who grew up in alcoholic families who, it was actually pretty genius to do this. They took beer labels, and there was so much alcoholism in the family that they took the label of their grandfather, their aunt, their uncle, and they put that label on their genogram as that's the way that the person that tells such a huge story. They also included a lot of this stuff on there, but that made such an impact that they were saying that they knew the adult by what they were drinking, which is wildly dysfunctional, but tells a huge story for what it was like as that child. So let's jump into this. Text it doesn't have to be just from this menu. You are explaining what you know of the person, and beside each circle or square, try to do like 3 to 5 words to describe that person. For example, that the uncle was passive aggressive, physically abusive, volatile. That speaks volumes to who the person is. So let me read some of these. Emotionally abusive, sexually abusive, physically abusive, volatile. Borderline, meaning that the person potentially suffered from borderline personality disorder, self-absorbed. We're going to see a lot of narcissism and narcissistic traits throughout the genogram if the family is highly dysfunctional. That the person was maybe safe as a child, that the person was depressed, anxious, neurotic, reactive, looking for a fight. Were they manipulative? Did they have a big ego, miserable, lost, codependent, rageful? Sexually, energy was off, which comes up in some of my other videos. Just means that the person isn't exactly sexually abusive, but their sexual energy is off. They may overly talk about sex. They may be sort of touchy-feely. There might be boundaries might really be off. The person rescues people, selfish, addicted. The person has some sloth going on, or they're lazy. That is the text. It can be anything that you want, but we're describing the dysfunction. So we're not looking for a lot of positive words. We're trying to spell out the dysfunction in the family. So don't necessarily go with the person's good qualities and just that. So jumping over to symbols. If there is an X over the circle or the square, it means that the person is deceased. You will see me used a lot of emojis in the genogram the hypothetical one that I came up with that we'll see in a few minutes, that really describing the person's affect, what it was like. Are they, shocked all the time? Are they depressed? Are they rageful? And I know we're putting somebody in sort of like, it's not like they experience that 24/7, but it does give an emotional quality to the person seeing your genogram to kind of get it, and for you to have an emotional impact on what it was like to experience that person as a child. The heart is really reserved. I want you to be very sparingly about the heart. I tell people, or the people who are my clients who are doing group work, that putting a heart next to somebody means that the person is very safe, they really get you, and they're in their own sort of version of recovery, and they're a resource. That's incredibly rare if you're coming from this sort of the toxic, dysfunctional family system. So don't just sort of use it willy-nilly and say, like, my mom is a really hopeless alcoholic, but I still love her. We're really looking forward that the person can be a very safe, nurturing person for you. Flat, no emotions, just is when somebody is very shut down. It is very difficult for children to read moods, especially that one for someone who doesn't give off a mood. So it's just, just a note there. Money sign, materialistic. When you put this explosive, this scary quality over somebody, that maybe they were reactive and volatile, so you'll see that this goes over the whole circle or square. Fundamentalist it's not in my videos, there tends to be, I think I tend to trigger people, I have no issue with religion. I'm spiritual myself. There's nothing wrong with having a religion, but fundamentalism is when I find that something culty, or that dogma, or the extreme attention, the extreme interpretation of something like the Bible or the Quran or whatever is interpreted literally, and that the family is really focused on that, like extreme black and white thinking, extreme dogma. That's fundamentalism. And I could have used the Star of David. I could have used a crescent moon for Islam, and I just sort of chose the askew crucifix here. I know that might be a little bit creepy, but that's where that is sort of coming from. I have no offense to Christianity itself, but raising children in extreme dogma is not good for them. don't know the person. This question mark over a circle or square just means that you don't really know grandma. Maybe you never met her. Maybe the parents didn't talk about her. And there's a side note, there's an important piece of that we're going to come back to later. This is my symbol for neglect, just a question mark within the house, meaning that as a child, there was really latchkey kids, extreme neglect. That kind of story where someone says, I knew how to make myself breakfast when I was 4 years old. That tells me the person was neglected, and that's where that symbol is coming from. Alcohol or drugs, just over there, just meaning that is that if was the parent involved with alcohol and drugs, are they an addict? That just goes there. Does the sibling struggle with that? And you'll see that in the fictitious genogram that I put together. Let's come back to colors. We're going to jump over to this over here. The lines are probably one of the most important qualities of putting the genogram together because they describe the relationships. Negative discord, this askew, jagged arrow can mean violence. It can mean power struggles. It can mean vitriol. Is that when, let's just say, a father is really hard on a daughter and not hard on the son, or something like that, is that the parent really singles out one of the kids and it's essentially a sort of, it could mean that they're a bully to them. It could mean parents doing that to each other. You'll see what I mean later. The dotted line signifies distance, that the parent is non-protective, the family is estranged, there's not a connection. This is my yin-yang sort of symbol for codependency. There could be on many definitions for codependency. Here's a couple quick ones. I think that codependency means that the people are together when they shouldn't be. I might ask a client, I might say, do you think your parents should have got a divorce, but they just didn't? And they say, oh my God, yes. That tells me that they were in a codependent relationship. My favorite definition of codependency is when a person is waiting for their partner to change without taking any real action, meaning they don't take them to couples, they don't get out of the relationship, the person doesn't really take care of themselves, but the person has magical thinking that the moody, rageful partner is just going to change one day because they're kind to them. I know that is kind of hard to wrap your heads around, but maybe you really identify with that. That's, so codependency is an umbrella term for many different things. I think in the traditional way is that, we think about it as like, oh, I can't go to a party without my partner, and that's a dependency. But the way that I look at it is that that the person is in a relationship for poor self-esteem, and they probably feel like they can't really do any better and they need a lot of help. Odd connection, these circles signify an odd connection, meaning that you'll see me discuss this is in the hypothetical genogram. It could be things like as surrogate spouse relationships where a parent gets their emotional needs from one of the children as opposed to their partner. It could mean that one child has a special relationship with the adult, and you'll see what I mean later. The solid arrow with coming from one person to another, let's just say that you'll see this come up, is that a parent might say, you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a lawyer, and I have given up on your sister, but you're going to save the family. There's like a focused on quality coming from the giver to the recipient, and that's not a good thing. Double lines friendships, we'll see that between siblings. That's kind of a rare thing in a highly toxic family system. The line that is focused on and controlling, we could even take that as where it's like, you're going to be a doctor and I've signed you up for medical school. You start Tuesday. I know that sounds crazy, but that's that controlling nature to it. The 3 dotted lines signifies hate. And this one down here is fused and hostile, where I look at that, I think about it as codependency on steroids. That the hostility is like, sometimes if I see an elderly couple and they viscerally hate each other, I think, wow, they've been doing that for decades. And that they are very much in, the relationship is based upon power and hatred. And there is very much a extreme contempt in the partnership. So let's come down to colors. Clinical psychology I took this from a lot of clinical psych directions on genograms. Anger, rage, meaning red, fine. Blue, depression, sadness, sounds good. Yellow, fear, that's an old Western, you're yellow, you're yeller, meaning that they're kind of cowardly. And I don't know why, but I love purple, but for some reason clinical psychology says it's potentially a color associated with disgust, whatever. Let's not read too much into that, but we're just using it for that purpose, and you'll see what I mean, meaning that these odd connections, you'll see this in the genogram as I've colored these purple to signify that there's something off in that odd connection. You'll see what I mean later. So these are the directions, or just to give you guys some ideas about how to put your genogram together. And you'll see what I mean. So let's move on to the third handout, which is the actual genogram itself. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the hypothetical genogram that I put together. This is a combination of the prior two handouts, the structure of the family system, the Joneses and the Smiths, and then I've plugged in all of those directions from the key, from the Genogram Dysfunctional Key, and I've created a pretty toxic family system. But this family system is not anything out of the ordinary that I would see when a client puts these together. It's not out of the ordinary. It's like this also mirrored these dynamics. There's a lot of these dynamics in my own family system. So where do we start? If you notice that we're still looking at the Joneses and the Smiths, this is exactly the format from the first handout, except I've just added that the oldest child here married somebody. And that's basically it. Squares are males, circles are females, you guys get it. And I have added all the colors and descriptors. So what I'm going to do now is walk you through a fictitious genogram. Is that when I have a client, like I said prior, when this assignment is usually done when I have a client doing my group work, and they present this as time goes on, as a group goes on, and we become a healthy sort of safe system for people, is people discuss this and people present their genogram to the group. And it's very, very intimidating to do. It's very, very scary. It's also very healing, because when we present this to a group of people that really get it and grew up in similar environments, that's so different than trying to get our family to see this stuff, which is actually something I strongly recommend we don't do, of trying to get family members to recognize how dysfunctional the family system is, unless that family member can kind of get it. So I have a weird, quasi-funny kind of, hypothetical, is that if we were to put this whole system together and tell the truth about our family, as I tell people, imagine if we brought this genogram to a family gathering where, it's like Thanksgiving or a holiday or something, and we present it to our family just out of the blue. We bust out with it and we're like, Mom, I wonder if you maybe struggle with borderline personality disorder, and Dad, you're very much a non-protective dad, and you say to your sister, sometimes I feel like you really don't care, and I think that might be part of your trauma too. Is usually, I know that is so ridiculous. We wouldn't do that. But why I bring it up is that's where the family would say, oh my God, you're always bringing this stuff up. You're always so sensitive. How could you bring this up to Mom? And I know it's a ridiculous example, but why I spell it out is when we tell the truth or try to get our families to see the truth, we're usually attacked for it. So I really challenge people to not go there with our family and try to get them to see this stuff, because usually they're not interested. They're usually pretty committed to misunderstanding us. So there's that caveat, meaning that if you are going to put together a genogram for your own personal thing, I really think it's more powerful to put it together and present it to somebody who is safe, somebody that gets it, so they help you process it, putting together. It is both a visual experience of putting it together, but the second part is really sharing it with people who are safe. So there's that. So that's where we'll stop for the first part of the video series, and we'll just jump into going through the hypothetical genogram in part 2. You guys can pull these handouts, and you'll hear me say this a couple times. You can pull these 3 handouts under Tools and Assessments or under Handouts on my website, which is patrickthandtherapy.com, and we'll see you in part 2 coming right up. Thanks.